how did you come to become engaged in this process of this particular vein of pursuit?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not many people seem to care much about circumcision. And so where I kind of started out, I was really just curious about it. I'd heard about it. I didn't really know anything about it. And I was like, I wondered why they do that and what it actually is. So I was about 18 years old and I just Googled, I don't remember exactly what I typed in, but what is circumcision? Why do they circumcise? What are the benefits, or is it good, or why? Like, I assumed it was good, but I didn't know how exactly. And after researching it, I started to learn that there are people who actually think that there are not benefits to circumcision and that it might actually even be harmful. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that there's this whole kind of crazy history behind it, and it never really was meant to be beneficial until very recently. That kind of myth arose that, there must be some health benefits, so they did all these studies and still haven't come up with much. But I started to realize it's actually been done to harm my sexuality, and historically was done to do that, to remove sensitivity and to prevent masturbation, actually. And learning that was like really jarring to me because I care a lot about sex and want to have a good sex life. And learning that it could actually have been damaged in some way was like really shocking to me. So I think the first person I ever tried to talk to about it was my mom, and she didn't really get it. She's actually a doctor herself and has performed a lot of circumcisions and was like, well, I guess she said she'd look into it, and she looked into it and was like, yeah, I guess there's really not really any reason to do it. Maybe there's some harm, but most guys are happy with it and you can't do anything about it. So I'm just like, sorry, but and I was not happy that she wasn't very empathetic, and I continued to research more and more, and the more I learned, the more sort of traumatized I got by it, and eventually I had to just stop
Wait.
researching.
What do you mean by traumatized? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so it's there's this idea, and I'm writing this book actually where I talk about this, that information can actually be traumatic. So, for example, it's well known in psychological literature that someone who learns that a friend of theirs or a family member who's close to them was in like a really bad car accident
Hmm.
actually develop PTSD from that, just from learning that someone close to them had something traumatic happen to them. So learning that something traumatic actually happened to yourself, and watching the procedure and seeing how sort of actually violent it is and painful for the baby, and yeah, having this total identity shift that, oh, actually I'm someone who's been sexually harmed and am missing out on something, um, is actually traumatic, I think, for a lot of guys. Um, and so yeah, that that shift in identity and that just seeing that procedure itself is
Oh
actually
my, yeah, no, I've witnessed it, and it's like I've never performed that. Never have any interest in performing that procedure, and it's like the physicians say it's not painful for the baby. I'm like, yeah, sure doesn't look that way to me. It looks pretty painful, and it's like, wow,
yeah.
yeah. So I see the trauma, the direct physical trauma at the moment, and they're like, oh, you don't remember it, but so it's like it's interesting.
Yeah, and another thing about trauma is that it's really stored in your body, and even it's interesting because the earlier in life a trauma occurs,
Mm.
the more profoundly it affects you. And we understand that with everything else, if you're traumatized at 3 years old, that can totally form your personality in a different way. But
Mm.
this event that actually happens at birth as early as possible, and is so extreme. It's strange that we haven't until recently kind of recognized that, oh, maybe this actually does have a
It's,
serious effect.
it's like there's a reason that they were doing it thousands of years ago,
Yeah,
right? And it's like where, why, and what does it do? Because it must do something, otherwise they wouldn't have persisted in doing it.
right. Yeah, that's the question. It's
And that's an interesting question. Like, how would you even begin to answer the question? Like, what's the difference, right? Like some kind of like serious psychological review and comparison between people who have had circumcision and people who have not
yeah.
at like near birth, right?
Hmm.
And see what differences there are, because it's like I believe there's going to be some differences that should be measurable, but it's like, okay, what does that mean? Until you look, you can't find out, right? I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Best Medicine Podcast with Bradley H. Werrell, DO. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe below, either over there or over there. Also, if you're interested in a medical consultation with myself, there's also information below.